I didn't know the nail salon story.
I told you I was going to come
I did,
up with
like,
something.
I found you and I came and threw my arms around you. But I was equally intimidated.
Okay, so I want to just start with a kind of cinematic version of an establishing shot. Can we just define what you mean by presence?
Sure. So I really wanted to take presence off of its pedestal. I think that people see it as something that's not accessible to the average person, that it's something that you get through, lots of yoga retreats, and yoga retreats are great, or a pilgrimage around the world, and it's some permanent state that you eventually get at the very end of your life. And I don't see it that way at all. I see it as momentary and fleeting, and of course everyone has been present in certain moments and isn't present in others. So I wanted to sort of break it down in a way that people could understand and harness, the tools that get them there. The way that I see presence is that it's the state of being attuned to and able to really comfortably express your true self. And your true self is your values and your beliefs and your skills, your passions, all of those things that make you you. Mm-hmm. To be attuned to them and able to deliver them, especially under pressure, that's presence. Mm-hmm.
So let me just ask you, because I think it seems to many people, and I'm sure many of the people in the audience here, that there are some people who are kind of born with a magical quality that gets called presence, whether it is that same definition that you just gave us or not. And so what do you think about that so-called magical quality?
I don't think it's quite the same as presence, although it may be heavily overlapping in the Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that we would call charisma, and I just don't think that people are born with this. Charisma seems to be more about sort of the intoxicating quality that you have on other people, mm-hmm. as opposed to presence, which is more about it's actually sort of more about the self in relation to others and how you feel you represented yourself in a situation and whether you were able to engage. So it's less about how the other sees you and more about how you see yourself. I don't know if that makes sense quite, but I think it's charisma that you're talking about. And I do think some people are born with that quality, mm-hmm. But I don't think it's quite the same.
So that's actually interesting for people to distinguish between presence and charisma. And presence is really the real elixir that people should be after.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're running around on a stage and, casting a spell on people. I mean, charisma just makes me think, and I mean no disrespect, but it makes me think Dale Carnegie. How to win friends and influence people. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, and maybe because I'm at a business school, people think that's what I'm talking about, and it's really not what I'm talking about. I want people to be able to influence themselves. Yeah. Which actually, in the end, as Walt Whitman said, it is our presence that convinces.
Right.
So we convince ourselves, and that allows us to convince others. But charisma seems to me very outward. Mm-hmm. Very much about the influence that you're having on others.
And it's so funny, actually, that you mentioned Dale Carnegie, because I actually researched him for my book, and in real life, he was this shy, insecure person who was always thinking about how to become more charismatic, and so made a study of this. And I think that ends up resonating for so many people.
Yeah, but I think that people who don't know that history think that he was one of these people who was born with charisma.
Exactly.
Or presence.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what about for you? You're out here now, I mean, you're out here tonight, but you're out here in general, writ large, right? Do you feel an extra pressure to model the quality of presence that you're talking about? What is that like for you?
Yeah, I do. Right now, I'm not sure if I should be present with you or with these people, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got two now. First, it's posture, and I'm telling you, if my posture is poor, the internet will go wild with trolls reminding me that my posture was poor. So that's one. But then people also say that they feel self-conscious around me about their posture. But now I do feel that I need to model presence. And actually, to be honest, today I had a packed schedule, and I was really excited about this. This is sort of like a life highlight for me. This is like a nerd life highlight. And so thank you all for coming. It's amazing. But so I felt, and I was starting to get tired. It was like mid-afternoon, and I had talked a lot. And I was at a sort of interview, and I really was like, I was not doing well. I was really having trouble concentrating, and they kept asking me questions, and I kept restarting, and it kind of reminded me of my elevator pitch story. But I was so apologetic because I felt like they must have such high expectations for me when it comes to presence, and I was really not present. And I actually had to say, I am so sorry, but we need to do this another day because I cannot be present with you right now. I can't give you my all, and I'm going to leave feeling really bad if I don't. And they were super understanding, but I felt acutely, and they were super nice people, but all of the things I talk about in the book about feeling socially judged and how we're in their heads trying to figure out what they think, I was doing all of those things. I was like, oh my gosh, they must think I'm such an idiot and that I'm so full of it because I wrote this book and now I'm not being present.
Right.
So saying, you know what, time out, I've got to stop this one because I can't do this, ended up being the right thing. But yeah, I do feel worried about that now.
Well, I mean, it's funny, actually, in telling that story, I think you just gave the audience a tremendous gift of that one tip of saying, it's actually okay to say, I can't be present right now, but I can be later, so just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Or give me a few moments, right?
And that gets, I think, at this theme that really surprised me after the TED Talk and with all the emails that I got, where people would write about a stressful situation, I talk about your biggest challenges, and they weren't focused on whether or not they got the job or the good negotiation outcome or the venture capital money or what. They weren't talking about the concrete outcome. They were talking about how they felt when they left the situation. And the theme was regret or satisfaction. That was what people cared about. They cared, did I represent myself fully? Did I show them who I really am? Did I feel seen and understood? And so that was today was that kind of situation where I knew that I was going to, even if I had finished it, if I had, helped them create the product that needed to be created, I would have left feeling really, really bad and regretful about how I had presented myself. So that theme, I think, made me so much more interested in this idea of presence that it kind of moved me away from focusing on these concrete outcomes to just wanting people to be able to face challenges that they face every day without that sense of regret after they leave. Because people can accept negative outcomes as long as they feel they represented themselves and that the process was fair, which procedural justice, which is another thing, could be another book, but half of it is I want to feel that I did my best, I did my part, and I was seen and understood.
Right. I mean, so having come to know you over these last years, I think of you as inhabiting the role of presence as you define it, a huge lot of the time. So from my perspective, it seems like this is something that comes quite easily to you. And that makes me wonder, what made you think to write the book in the first place? What made you think to go into this whole line of work in the first place? Can you tell us all about
it's really funny that you say that, because because Ken, your husband, sent us a picture the other day from Christmas, because we do holidays together, and it was a picture of like everyone else playing a board game and I wasn't in the room, and I was like, oh God. I was like probably on the internet worrying about some review or something like that. So I'm really shocked to hear you say that you see me as present. She's very understanding about those things. She's like my book writing doula.
Yeah, it was a funny thing because we just took this ski holiday about 2 weeks ago, right before your book came out, and I had been in the exact same position at that exact same time of year, only several years before. So, I understood every beat of what you were going through.
It was literally the day the book came out, and the next day we went out to Utah and stayed with them. So yeah, you really saw the total neurotic phase of this. No, I don't think. I do think that I was born really curious and interested in people. And so I think that helps. Just to be fair, I think that helps.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Why does that help?
Because being present, well, you can certainly be present alone. The challenges that I write about and the things that scare people the most tend to be social interactions, right? So in those challenges, being interested in people and really wanting to know what they're about and what motivates them, that makes it easier for you to get a little bit out of your head and focus on them. That doesn't mean that it works all the time, but that helps a little bit. But no, I don't think at all that. In fact, I was, I did lots of performing arts. I was a professional ballet dancer. I sang. I did theater. I think I had like terrible stage fright, and I would be on stage and. Almost, I don't know if anyone remembers that Brady Bunch episode where Marcia gets on TV
Before you even
and she
say
sees
the
the red light and she can't stop looking at the red light on the camera.
Oh,
anyway, all right.
Okay.
So
but you felt that way when you were on stage.
Yeah, so I really felt like it was very hard for me to be present. I think I've learned to do it since my head injury, and like very, very slowly. But I think that is what led. Can we tell
everybody what you mean by that? Because I'm not sure everyone in the audience knows.
Yeah. So last week I had a head. No, I'm just kidding. It was, and since then, no. When I was 19, so I went to the University of Colorado. I wanted to go to a state school, and I was paying for college. That was part of why I wanted to go to a state school. But I was a sophomore, and I had taken a weekend trip to Missoula, Montana, with some friends of mine, and we decided to drive back Sunday night and try to get there for morning classes at 8, which was a mistake. It's like a 14-hour drive. And we were taking shifts. Anyway, to make a long story short, in the middle of the night, like about 4 a.m, my friend who was driving fell asleep. We were, in Cheyenne, like near Cheyenne, Wyoming. There were no other cars. I was asleep in the back seat with the seat down, and the other friend had fallen asleep. They had their seatbelts on. I realized that I don't often tell people they're fine. But she fell asleep, went off the road, the rumble strip woke her up, she overcorrected, we rolled several times, and I got thrown out of the car. So I don't remember it, but I woke up in a hospital, and I had been withdrawn from college, and they did all of this neuropsych testing, and they poke and prod in every way with head injuries because they don't know what data they need to give you some kind of prognosis. But I learned that my IQ had dropped by 30 points, which is 2 standard deviations. That's a lot. I knew what my IQ was because I had been in a gifted program as a kid in this really small town farm school. And it kind of meant a lot to me as part of my identity. So when I lost that, and then also with that kind of brain injury, which is called a diffuse axonal injury, where the different if you think of the brain as an onion, and each layer is a different density, and I'm really sorry to the neuroscientists out there because I'm really cheapening this, and then when you have that kind of accident, all of the layers of the brain are kind of moving against each other at different speeds. You have this diffuse axonal injury. Axons are tearing everywhere, so you become a different person. You really do. Your emotions, thoughts, behaviors, everything is affected. It's not like, oh, it's the motor cortex, so it's going to affect your movement. So you just have such a loss of identity, and it's such a struggle. You try to hold on to your old self, and you eventually have to break up with the old self because you don't know each other anymore. And then you have to hope there's another self out there for you. It's one of those it's not a terrible relationship, but I think we need to break up. And I'm really hoping there's something new. It just was such a struggle, and there was so much social anxiety. Everything was difficult. And when it was really sort of being more mindful about how I learned and how I interacted, starting to pay attention to those, break it down, things that seemed natural before. It kind of forced you to be more present. And then, of course, that with the TED Talk and telling the story a little bit about the head injury and hearing people write and share their similar experiences just really got me interested in this this topic of how do we become present, and not fearful. And yeah, I'm going on and on about this, but I think that one of the main themes for me is I realized recently that the people who I most respect or most look up to I used to think of them as fearless, and now I think of them as brave. That of course they're fearful, but they're brave. They push through it. And that was a big part of becoming present for me. I had so many fears after the head injury. I felt just so dragged down by those fears. I saw every situation that was challenging as a threat and not an opportunity. And so I could not engage and be present. Anyway, so as I learned that it was really sort of about pushing through those fears, that allowed me to become more present. I mean, I'm still learning, obviously. Yeah. I'm not like all over the place right now, but.
So what's your advice to somebody who, for whatever their own reason of personal history, is in a place right now where they are feeling fearful, whether of social rejection, which I think is often, as you're saying, one of the more acute and disabling fears, or whatever the sense of acute awareness of threat is, somebody who's in that place, how do they go from that place to a place where they're present with their whole selves? Because as you say, when you have those kinds of fears, it's putting a cognitive load, and so it's actually preventing you from being able to be present. So being able to be present. So it's a vicious cycle.
Right.
Okay.
So
what's the way out of the cycle?
I'll give a few examples, and just to be clear again, I don't think that they're just going to become present, but they'll be able to be present in these moments.
Right.
The first, and this may seem really small, but I think it's really important, is to realize that everyone has felt this way, and like about half the world is feeling this way right now, right? So you're not alone in that feeling. It's so isolating feeling, and I think part of it is that it's based in this fear of being kicked out of the clan, but it's also because we don't talk about our, weaknesses. Yeah. We're afraid to share those feelings, and so we don't get to connect. Men even more than women, I think, are burdened by this. But so I think the first is to realize that you are not alone, and it's not abnormal or pathological to be feeling that way. The second, I think, is to affirm your core values, the things that really make you, you. So if you had to list 5 things that are core to who you are, it could be family, art, helping people, fairness, there's so many things. List 5, rank them, and then choose the top 1, write about why it matters to you, why it makes you, you, and write about a time when you were really able to express that and how it felt. That's called self-affirmation. Self-affirmation is not Stuart Smalley, sorry, another pop culture reference that people might not get, but who used to say, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. And then by the end of the sketch, he'd be in a shame spiral and saying he hated himself and he would die without love and everything. So the reason that didn't work was because it was way too general. And when you feel bad, you can't just be like, oh, I'm actually great, because then you're just lying to yourself and you're like, now I trust you even less. But the real self-affirmation is this. It's it's not about being great at anything. It's about what I care about and what makes me me. So self-affirmation has been shown in literally hundreds of studies to reduce people's social anxiety dramatically, even to reduce their hormone levels that are related to anxiety. And there are many different hormones that are related to anxiety. It improves their performance in stressful situations. The coolest thing about it is that, say your value is helping people, and that's what you write about, but your challenge is public speaking. It doesn't make sense really that writing about how you like helping people will make you a better public speaker, but it does. Because when you go in to do that stressful thing, you know that whatever the outcome, you're still you. You feel more grounded. And you leave feeling less judged. And the funny thing is that you become a better public speaker or better at math tests or whatever the challenge is. So that's, I think, so knowing that other people feel this way, self-affirmation, and a lot of the book is about how your body is leading your mind. And that trap that I was just talking about, the Stuart Smalley trap, which is what I would call a mind-mind intervention, it doesn't work because we don't trust ourselves in those moments. But the body is so linked to the mind. I would say the body is constantly leading a conversation with the mind. If you start to understand how that's working, you can skip the mind-mind conversation and have your body tell you how you're feeling. Have your body tell you you're not being chased by a predator, you're just a little stressed out about this thing coming up. Because we haven't quite, our nervous systems haven't caught up yet with where we are sort of socially. Normally we're not being chased by a predator, it's not a life or death situation, but our sort of nervous systems are telling us fight or flee.
Yeah.
And it's just not at all adaptive in those situations. So the body, by opening up and acting as if you're not feeling threatened, that you're feeling safe, tells the mind you're okay.
Right.
So those are three things.
Those are really good ones. It's funny, so you were probably partly alluding to my example, because I used to be very uncomfortable with public speaking. And one of the shifts that I made also over time was when I first started out speaking, I used to focus on the members of the audience who looked very bored or disgruntled. And I kind of learned over time to shift my focus to the people who actually looked interested. And then from there, you start shifting your internal focus to not even thinking or particularly caring that much about how you're judged. You're there to communicate something and hopefully to impart something of value, and that's the only standard that matters. And people used to tell me that when I first started speaking, and I would say, you're crazy. No one could really go on stage and feel that way. But it is possible to make that shift.
Absolutely.
Over time. Okay, so I'm going to read a quote to you from your book that I found fascinating, and I'm going to ask you to discuss it. You say, powerlessness is at least as likely to corrupt as power is. It's really intriguing.
Yeah. So power is this really prickly word. And if you do like a word association and I say, what word do you think of when I say power? A lot of you would say corrupt or corruption. It's funny, I teach at a business school and it's less a problem there. People are more comfortable with the word. But in general, I think that people hear power and they think corruption. And I think it's because they're thinking of, first of all, a certain kind of power in a certain kind of very salient situation where someone does abuse it.
Right.
And I'm going to walk through this a little bit. First, they're talking about, when you say power, you think about social power, most of us do, which is power over others. It's power over others' access to necessary resources. It's not about the self, it's about power over other people. Robert Caro, who was LBJ's biographer, was once asked, so does power corrupt? And he said something like, power doesn't necessarily corrupt, but power always reveals. And that gets closer to my way of thinking of power. He was still talking about social power and sort of good leaders and bad leaders. I'm going to take it a little bit further and say that the kind of power I'm talking about is personal power. So if social power is controlling access to resources that other people need and that are external to you, personal power is controlling access to the resources that you possess internally. Now, it seems that you should be able to access those easily, but in some ways they're even harder to access, especially when you feel scared or you're having this fight or flight response. Yeah. So what happens when people feel personally powerless, I think, is that they act out. They become destructive, either to themselves or to others, because they feel so bad and they have no idea how to get out of it. I would say, honestly, the people who are writing the nastiest comments on the internet are people who are sitting at home feeling powerless, feeling alone, feeling scared, and that's a kind of destructive behavior that happens. So I think that it not only can corrupt how you treat other people, but it also corrupts yourself, right? It doesn't allow you to be you. It puts you in a little bit of a cage. So this kind of personal power is infinite. It's not zero sum.
Right.
It's liberating. It allows you to comfortably be in situations where you might get pushed back, but you're okay because you know who you are.
And so when you're on the other side of the internet comments, trollish internet comments that you know are coming from somebody who probably is writing out of a sense of powerlessness, how much does that help in the moment?
I have noticed there's a thing that happens when something new comes out where the nastiest people come out at the beginning and then it slows down. I'm not sure why, but so I'm in that phase right now, which so it's a little acute.
And I didn't mean you specifically.
No,
because
I know,
I think
but
everybody deals with.
But it feels right now. It feels like a very personal question. Okay. But it's.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's okay if you remind me of the body shaming comments and all the nasty. I'm just kidding. But it's not the. You need to take a moment to step back from it to be able to apply that wisdom to how you feel about those things. So of course your first reaction is hurt or anger or whatever, or to feel ashamed. It's when you get a little bit of distance from it. So one thing I have learned, and I learned this actually from, well, first of all, being a professional ballet dancer, like you deal with a lot of rejection and nastiness. So my grad school advisor always said that that's what made me tough, was that I had been a ballet dancer. But in academia, you're constantly getting reviews of your articles, and nothing just gets accepted. Everything is picked apart. That's the way the process works. So I really took it hard when I'd get these reviews back. And then I learned that I needed to read them and not even begin to write a response, to just set them aside, look at them again in a week. And I felt so much more able to have some power, to get back in the saddle and to actually respond. Now, I'm not saying that the people writing those reviews were coming from a place of powerless necessarily, although I think academia is full of sort of squabbles that come down to personal powerlessness. But online, I think it's the same way. I mean, sometimes you just need to take some space from it, and you can come back and go, oh, I can perspective take now and understand that this person is feeling bad and it has nothing to do with me. So it's not easy, but I think I'm learning how to do that.
No, and I think the perspective taking is a really big thing. And I mean, if you're talking about those kinds of online comments, I remember when I was going through that, I actually asked my husband to read all of them. I didn't want to interact with them directly. There was something about having them mediated. I mean, some of them I didn't want to hear at all, but some I wanted to know what they were. But there was something about having them read to me by someone else instead of interacting with it directly that was able to remove the sting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question that actually came. We did a great Facebook chat together a week or so ago, and one of the people asked, what do you do if you really are a nice person, you want to show up for people, but you have bitchy resting face? And so people really don't know that about you.
Wow.
Like, how do you show up for them? Like, oh, I know. Wait, there was more to the question. It was also, he was saying, I want to be authentic, and I feel like the only way to be authentic would be to have my real face, but my real face conveys the wrong idea.
Oh, geez, that's a really hard one. I don't know.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, I used to be stumped by a version of this back when I used to be a corporate lawyer, a million years ago. So my way of working, my preferred way of working, is with my head down, and I'm like this. And I would sit at my desk in that position, and people would walk by and say, what's the matter, what's the matter, what's the matter? And meanwhile, I was in a very deep state of flow, and it used to drive me crazy that it was misperceived. But I did kind of toggle back and forth
that
between
feels different to me.
Doing my thing and working
so,
like that.
Okay, here's a half-baked answer.
Okay.
That you can dismiss or not, but I would say, I don't remember that question, so sorry that I missed that one, but that facial expression back to the body-mind connection, is probably not making that person feel that good, right? So there's another motivator to maybe shift it a little bit. So perhaps changing that expression might change mood a little bit and even allow that person to engage a little bit more. There's a qualification, which is I really don't like these sort of outside-in approaches to changing your body language, like, well, change this expression or do this or that in interactions, right? So what you're doing before in private, if it helps you, great. I generally don't like these sort of piecemeal, like smile more and do this and do that kinds of interventions. So I'm a little bit hesitant to give that advice. But remembering that your facial expressions, your body language, other people are mirroring, and it's a little bit contagious. There might be some motivation to shift that a little bit. So that's one of the maybe few situations where I would say you might want to work on that.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Okay, wait, I want to dive deeper into body language because you've done incredible work on the role of the body in overcoming traumatic memories and traumatic experiences. Can you share a little bit of that?
I've done research on other people's research, so I haven't done that actual research. But what I learned as I was writing the book, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I don't have access to clinical populations, and I really hadn't thought much about how the body-mind connection worked for people who were injured, who had experienced trauma, who were dealing with other kinds of mental illness. But when I started to dig into this body-mind literature, I realized that most of it was actually not in social psychology. It was in clinical psychology or in medical journals, because trauma, in a way, having post-traumatic stress is the ultimate form of personal powerlessness. You feel that your body has betrayed you, you've lost your sense of identity and pride, you're constantly in a state of fear, right? So you're shut down, you're not able to be present, you don't remember even who you are, and it's visceral. Trauma is so visceral. Physical trauma is visceral, psychological trauma is visceral. It's in the body carries trauma around. And there are others, Bessel van der Kolk, who The Body Keeps the Score, I think is his book. He's done tremendous work on this, people who've experienced all kinds of trauma. But the work that I'm seeing now is a lot of work dealing with combat veterans with PTS. And it's a very difficult population to treat for a couple of reasons. One, post-traumatic stress is just hard to treat. But second, they really don't want to talk about it. They don't want to revisit the experience. They generally, and this is not a stereotype, I think this is a reality, they are from a sort of a population that isn't that interested in talk therapy, and so they already have a sort of aversion to it. And they really do feel that their bodies betrayed them in some way, that their bodies let them down. They've lost their sense of pride. They also are coming back from a situation where they felt they would find a sense of pride and honor, and instead they came back feeling completely traumatized and helpless and powerless. So these body interventions kind of skip the talking. And I'm not saying that talk therapy is bad. For many people, that's the way to go. And for many people, we should be doing both. For this population, learning tiny little changes that are yoga-based completely alleviates post-traumatic stress symptoms. And I'm really not exaggerating.
Wait, let me ask you to say that again. Tiny little changes can totally alleviate
post-traumatic stress symptoms. So one of these studies was done by a researcher at Stanford who I think has recently moved to Yale, named Emma Sapala, who actually has a book coming out next month. And Emma's work was with veterans. She taught them a really simple yoga-based way of breathing that also involved expansive body postures. And it was a very short program. Compared to the control group, the experimental group, after the intervention, a month after the intervention, showed no signs of post-traumatic stress. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's going to get the same result, but that's massive.
Wow.
Right? On the same clinical measures that were used before they went into the program, a year later, the results hardly changed at all. And she was hearing these people say things like, I feel like myself again. One of the fathers wrote to her and said, thank you for giving me my son back. You know, she said, these were people living alone in their basements, scared to go out into the world, and they're now interacting with people and feeling proud again. So I think that trauma and powerlessness are so heavily overlapping, and it really speaks to this body-mind connection.
And so if we wanted to take away from tonight one or two
Are we there?
powerful, no. I'm just saying, I'm just focusing on this last point that you made. If we wanted to take away one or two shifts in our own body positioning that we should make ourselves, what do you think are one or two of the most important ones, or the most powerful ones?
Let me kind of link it to the last question, because I realized I had wanted to say a little bit more about my own kind of history with trauma. And it gets into this, you know, what are the things you can take away. But after the head injury, because I wasn't driving the car, I was terrified to be a passenger. So the first time I got in a car, I went completely into this fetal ball. Like, I pulled my knees up to my chest and I wrapped my arms around my knees. I felt so totally powerless being a passenger. And it reminded me of when I was little. We lived in a park in Washington State, in eastern Washington, and there weren't many people there, like 300 in this town. And I used to play with the fine little creatures to play with, like, you know, snakes even. But also these little, I called them pill bugs. They were those little bugs, you pick them up and they roll into a ball. And I loved them. I loved them, and I wanted them to trust me. And it was great. So
this is Amy.
I know. It's so true. So I would pick them up, and they would always roll into a ball, and I would feel so bad because I'd be like, but I'm good, and I'm not going to hurt you. But I realized that I was like this big, you know, big threatening creature to them. And so when I pulled myself into that position, I remember so clearly, it was a flashbulb memory, that first ride away from the hospital. I thought, oh my gosh, I feel like a pill bug, like I'm doing what pill bugs do. I didn't at that time realize that the connection, you know, at that time I only thought, well, this is just the way I feel now. There's nothing I can do about it. I didn't think that I could unfurl and make myself feel better. But now I wonder what would have happened. Would I have healed faster, sort of psychologically, gotten back to myself if I had forced myself to open up then? So, I mean, I guess the first thing is to realize that, you know, we spend more time sort of slouched and slumped and, you know, wrapping ourselves up and hiding ourselves than we do open and expansive and taking up space and using proud postures. You know, what people do when they cross the finish line in first place in every culture in the world is throw their arms up into a V, lift their chin, and they tend to even open their mouths. It's very expansive. It's been studied in about 4 dozen cultures now, including places where the researcher Jessica Tracy had to walk in and find people who had never interacted with an outsider. When she showed them pictures of people in this pose and said, what are they feeling? They would say things like pride, victory, power. Even congenitally blind people do this, right? So it's very, very primitive. That link between expansiveness and power is primitive. So what happens if you just turn that around? If you say, okay, well, why don't I act like I won and see what happens to my mind? So that's really where this research was kind of coming from. And the first thing is to realize that when you are going like this, what your mind is hearing from your body is, uh-oh, you're under attack. You better flee, you better fight, you know, you better withdraw. So don't let your body tell you that. Even when you're just sitting at your computer, you're doing that. It's still, your body is communicating with your mind. So the first thing is just sit. I can't believe I'm saying this. Sit up straight, you know? It's, and, you know, if you, like, rest your arms on the arms of the chair, set up your workspace so that you have to reach a little bit, put pictures of your family or people that you love above your, you know, high up on the wall so that you have to look up, get up and walk for you know, have walking meetings. Just simple things like that that are just part of your daily routine. One of my research assistants brushes her teeth with her hand on her hip. If you sleep in a fetal ball, we have some preliminary evidence that people who wake up like that wake up much more stressed out. Now, it's obviously bi-directional, but the people who wake up like this are super happy, like annoyingly happy, right? And there are people, and about 40% of people sleep in the fetal position. So if you're a fetal sleeper, especially if you're a fetal hand clenching sleeper like I am, where you get like impressions of your nails in your hands, when you wake up, just stretch out for a minute before you put your feet on the ground, because really every day is a challenge, right? In some way. So those are just sort of the everyday things that you do. When you, I mean, your phone, your phone, it's a real problem, you know. We're all on our phones doing this. This is the posture of people with major depression. Right? It really is. It looks just like the drawings of people with major depression. So don't let your phone be your enemy. I don't think I'm going to be able to pry phones out of the hands of people. I can't even put my own down, really. But what you can do is set a reminder every hour that says, check your posture. You know, so it's sort of like the simplest possible wearable device. So check your posture and make sure. I promise you
were walking the walk, because I saw you in the green room before checking your phone, but your posture was perfect.
Well, I do try to. I do move a lot. So the other one is that it's funny. Somebody was recently asking me, well, how would you apply this to first dates? And I have to tell a personal story here. So my wonderful husband, I don't know where he is, but he's somewhere out there. We met on Facebook when he posted this picture of himself in the most extreme power pose imaginable. Honestly, look up Amy Cuddy's husband and you'll see it. He's beautiful and this tall, athletic guy, and he lived in Australia, by the way, so we were 10,000 miles apart. It showed up in my news feed, and I thought, what a jerk, or he must have a good sense of humor. And as you know, he's a gentle giant, sweetheart, who didn't even really realize that it looked so intimidating. But our first actual date in person, this was so stupid. We decided to meet in Paris because we were both in Europe for work, and we thought, oh, let's meet in Paris. That would be really romantic. Also, Cadel Evans, the Australian bicyclist, was going to win the Tour de France that weekend, and he wanted to see it. But that was sort of, I thought it was secondary. Now I think it was primary. But we met in Paris, and you know, we were wildly nervous. We were like shaking with anxiety. And you know what we did that weekend? We walked all over Paris. We just walked. And it was so much better than sitting in a restaurant and trying to, sitting still and trying to get to know each other. Walking allowed us to move and to expand. And walking is also associated with, when people feel powerful, their walking becomes more expansive. Their strides are longer. They move their arms more. They have more vertical movement. They move their heads more. So walking we basically spent 2 days walking around Paris as our first date, which really allowed us to not feel so, eyes locked on each other. But also, I think the movement made us feel a little bit more confident and powerful.
Right. So
paying attention to your walking. And then, of course, the big one, and maybe we'll get into this next, but is, of course, the thing that people associate with me is power posing, and Wonder Woman in particular. And I got recently an email from somebody who knows Linda Carter, who said Linda Carter wants to meet you, and I was like,
oh, that is fantastic. That is everything coming full circle.
That's pretty exciting, exactly. But for the youngins, Linda Carter played Wonder Woman, okay, for many years. So anyway, the other one is that before you walk into those challenging situations, you can expand as much as you want. You can be obscenely expansive. If you're alone, you're not offending anyone, right? So why not just be as expansive as you can possibly be? And then when you walk into that situation, you have sort of optimized your brain to not see it as a threat, but to see it as an opportunity. Right. You walk in with a sense of confidence and security instead of that sense of fear.
It's funny because when you were talking about power posing, at one point, the audience was laughing, I think, with, it was a sense of wow, isn't it just funny, the idea of really putting these ideas into real life and really using these power poses. But I was thinking, as I heard that laughter, I was thinking, I have an 8-year-old son who plays a lot of soccer, and he spends so much time thinking about which expansive posture he's going to adopt at the moment he scores goals. And so he's like always practicing his different, these things. And he's got a whole different suite of them that he practices with absolutely no self-consciousness whatsoever.
That's great.
And that makes me think, and I think I'll just ask you this final question because I want to open it up to our audience questions. But what differences do you see in the adoption of power posing and body intelligence in general? Differences for children and for men and women, which is probably a pretty big question to end with.
So So I studied sexism for 15 years. I still do. But I really, if you ask people in my field, what does Amy Cuddy study, they would say stereotyping and prejudice or sexism. And I gave a lot of talks on sexism to young women who were going out to interview for jobs. And I got to tell you, it's not hard to document sexism. It's not a hard effect to get. There is sexism. And so but what is hard to find are interventions that will undo it. And at least at the organizational level, I think we're moving in that direction, but it's really challenging. So I would give these talks basically showing all the data on sexism, and that would be the end. And I'd be like, so good luck with your job interview, and so that's part of what got me interested in posture was that this is a tool like this. Facing prejudice is another huge challenge that many of us face. I mean, almost all of us will in some ways. So can I give people a tool? And I'm not saying that it's women's responsibility to fix sexism, although women can be equally sexist. But I wanted to give them a tool to try to overcome the fear that they have that that's what's happening in those situations. Okay, so I've got this background in sexism research, and of course, when it comes to expansive posture, there are gender differences. I mean, the man-spreading is man-spreading. Yeah. Also, I've gotten emails from people going, "Thanks a lot for man-spreading." I'm like, I think people have been doing that for a long time. I'm sure that I did not invent manspreading.
They're not laying this at my feet.
Men and women, men carry themselves in much more expansive ways on average. Not everyone, but on average. Is it nature or nurture? Of course, that's the next thing that comes up. Well, think of little kids. Little kids, boys and girls, they're flailing their arms around, doing cartwheels. They're not scared to express themselves before they hit middle school. It's middle school where you start to see your daughters collapse and wrap themselves up and hide. And that's where that happens. So I wanted to find out, well, when do kids start learning these associations, or do they just know them? So I looked at 2 age groups, 4 and age 6. And the reason for that is that at around age 5, kids start to strongly gender identify. So I thought that it would be good to get those sort of brackets, right? So right before and right after. And if it's innate, then you're going to see that the 4-year-olds are just as sexist as the 6-year-old. What we found was that we showed them pictures of the wooden dolls like that in either powerful or powerless postures, and asked them to, on an iPad, to touch the boy and touch the girl, right? So they saw 16 pairs. By age 4, 75% show a bias towards seeing the expansive dolls as boys. By age 6, 85% of the kids show that bias. But the more alarming result is that at age 4, only 13% saw every pair as, male expansive, female contractive. By age 6, almost half of them did. So they are learning this, right? This is not something they're born knowing. They don't quite internalize it and express it until they get a little bit older and start to go through puberty, feel more aware of the other gender. But I think we have to do something to show our kids, boys and girls, more examples of women carrying themselves with pride. My favorite, by the way, is Misty Copeland. I always have this fantasy that she's in the audience. She's probably not, but She's like my dream person to meet. You're not here, right? Okay. If you are, just meet me at the bed. No. But so for those of you who don't know, and most New Yorkers do know, Misty Copeland is the first female African-American principal dancer at American Ballet Theater. Not only is she that, but she also overcame enormous challenges. I mean, talk about like social judgment. People were explicitly telling her, you're not built like a ballerina, you should quit again and again. You're too masculine, you're too short, you're too this, you're too that. Honestly, implicit in that was you're too black, because ballet is seen as a white person's art. I mean, I again, as someone who studies also racism, I'm sure that was part of the story. But wow, she just kept on pushing, and now she's one of the greatest dancers in the world. What I love about it is that she's doing the classical ballets, which often involve like the protagonist female like crumpling up dead on the floor at the end. But still, look at her Instagram feed, and it's filled with pictures of her carrying herself with pride and power and beauty and grace in what might be one of the most feminine professions in the world. So I love that we're seeing more of that, and I think we need to show our kids that, you know, expansiveness is not really linked to gender, right? You can be whatever you want to be and still carry yourself with power and pride and grace.
Right, well said.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have many, many different questions. Let's see. During your TED Talk, oh, this is great. Okay. During your TED Talk, you teared up when recounting the story about your surgery. What are your thoughts about women crying in the workplace? As a woman in financial services, I am scared to death of showing that much emotion and vulnerability in a professional setting. Thank you.
Wow.
Great question, right?
Yes. So I really hate any prescription that takes us away from being authentic. I think that honestly, I think that the fact that I got teared up probably made the talk more powerful. Although when I rehearsed it and got teared up, we all were like, well, don't do that tomorrow, you know? And I certainly didn't script it, and I tried not to, but it was very hard for me to tell that story without getting teared up. So certainly there's power in showing openness and vulnerability and true feelings. I think you can't do it all the time, but and it probably, and I'm guessing, it depends on whether you have power in the hierarchy. So I would guess that the more power you have, the more freedom you have to express, to do those kinds of things. I do study also this trade-off between perceived warmth and perceived competence, which is more of a problem for women than for men. So women are more likely to, if they're seen as soft and warm, they lose points on competence, even if they really are, these two things really are not related, right? You can be really warm and really competent. So my honest answer is in moderation, not when you're getting feedback. It's more powerful when you're speaking and you're choked up about a story that you're telling. But I do think people make different attributions, and I'm sorry, I feel like we're back to the negative sexism talks that leave us with well, it's kind of bad, but people make different attributions for women and men's expressions of emotions. So women, when they show anger in the workplace, are seen as kind of loose cannons. Men are seen as supporting sort of some just cause. So their anger is justified. Women's anger is seen as sort of out of control, too emotional. So that, I can't really answer that without empirical data on it, but I would say when you're getting feedback, probably best to practice receiving that without crying.
Yeah, definitely with the feedback. And what I was thinking as I thought about this question is I think it's also very contextual. So, in my old life, I used to be a Wall Street lawyer a gazillion years ago. And in that context, compared to the context that I now live and work in, which is much more, of fellow authors and social entrepreneurs, and it's a much more kind of touchy-feely environment, honestly, And so I can always tell, to this day, I can tell when I get an email from an old friend who I knew from my corporate lawyer days, because the very style of emailing is much less emotive. There are more periods and fewer exclamation points. There are just fewer declarations of emotion in general. And I remember when I was a lawyer feeling like crying no, but it was really important to me to figure out a way to express caring and humanity through some other socially acceptable means.
Yeah.
But it's a very delicate dance.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Okay, so let me see. Next one. Can you offer some language to use when talking to kids about presence? And this comes from a third grade teacher. Great question.
So I'm trying to, I don't quite have the language yet. I hear so much from teachers, so often from teachers, that what I'm trying to do is build a community of teachers who can talk about how they're applying these principles, because a lot of them have found their own ways to do it. Recently somebody was telling me that they get their kids, they're also a grade school teacher, they get their kids to use these expansive postures before tests. And I mean, this is a tiny little detail, but potentially an important one. And she found that she had started by having them do it in a circle facing each other, and that didn't work. They felt really awkward about that. But when she now has them do it in a circle facing outward, and it seems to work much better. I know that that's not about language, but I think I would say the way to get at presence with kids is to get them to start thinking about these self-affirmations, right? You know, what do you really care about? What makes you who you are? And I think that gets them in touch with that, and probably will make it easier for them to be present. So I think talking about that and how those things are unique, and they don't have to all be the same, and they're part of who you are no matter what happens to you. And then maybe moving into, I think that these conversations about social evaluation and judgment, I mean, it's always really hard in middle school. I mean, I think it has been for ages. I wonder if it's harder now. I can't believe how much social media affects kids. You know, it's not anymore about like sitting at the right table at in the lunchroom. It's like, how many likes do you instantly get on Instagram?
Yeah.
And so I do think we need to be having conversations about that too. And I think it has to start sooner, like really just getting them to talk about, well, what does it really mean when somebody likes a photo or doesn't? Does it mean they really like it? Does it mean they really like you? I think those kinds of conversations also attenuate that social judgment threat.
Yeah.
So who are you, and what does social judgment really mean?
Yeah, and also to know that when you're seeing those perfectly curated photos on Instagram of everybody perfectly happy and surrounded by all their perfect friends, that's not actually the reality. And so not to do that comparison of the kids' own lives to this curated presentation that they're seeing.
Yeah,
but I think kids really need
think about
reminding
sort of
about that.
What do you think is really happening in these pictures?
Yeah.
You know, what do you think, what do you, when you post something, what are you trying to communicate? And you know, maybe third graders are not doing that quite yet. But yeah, core values and talking about social judgment, I would say, is a starting point.
Okay, here's another one for you. My daughter will be interviewing for colleges soon. What advice do you have for young, shy women in this situation?
So, I mean, I have a lot of different pieces, but I'm going to focus on one that I think people forget about. Another way in which people express power is to speak more slowly and to take pauses, and just to pause while they speak. Because it's really powerful, right? I mean, it is, but we fear them because we feel threatened, and if there's a pause, it's like there's a hole and an opportunity for somebody to get in there and take you down. What I see happening with particularly shy people in interviews is that they really rush through their answers. They're afraid to ask questions. They certainly don't pause. They truncate their answers. So I would say focus on slowing down speech. When somebody asks you a question, trust that they really want you to answer it thoughtfully. So don't even be afraid to pause before you answer it. I mean, reflect. Don't jump right into answering the question. I mean, think about what you want to say. Yeah, so take up temporal space. Slow down your speed of speaking, and take pauses. When something is really important that you want to communicate, pause after that, to allow it to sink in. People need time to process. Give them the time to process. What it shows is that you feel comfortable, that you feel that you deserve to be there, and also that you respect this interaction, that you're engaged, that you're interested in this interaction.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a related point to the taking up space at the interview is to advise your daughter to come prepared with stories to tell beforehand that are going to illustrate what her contributions have been in the world. Because one of the things that shy people in particular have trouble with is taking up the space to tell stories, because it feels as if stories are a waste of time because they're not cutting to the chase of the point.
That's right.
When in fact, stories are one of the most powerful ways we have of actually making the point, but really hard to internalize that. So they have to come up with the stories, and they also have to practice them in advance until they become fluent with them, and figure out in advance what are the pieces of the story that they're not so comfortable with, and just leave those out on the cutting room floor.
Definitely, and that relates back to something that I didn't get to say earlier about presence, which is sort of what does presence look like? So we talked about sort of what it is, being attuned to who you are and being able to express that. What it looks like to other people is that you believe your story, that you are confident without being arrogant, and that you're communicating in a way that's fluid and harmonious because you're being authentic. And when we're not being authentic, when we're lying, all of a sudden there are all these asymmetries, there are all these things that aren't going together in what we're saying and what we're doing. So the believing your story point is really important. If you ask people, I like to do this sort of thought exercise where I'll ask venture capitalists, say you have 5 equally good ideas, and you have to choose one based on the pitch. What are you looking for? And what I hear again and again is, if they don't believe their story, there's no way I believe their story. If they're not gonna buy what they're selling, why would I buy what they're selling? So if I pick up any hints that they're not in this, now that doesn't mean they have to have all the answers. In fact, if they have all the answers, I'm a little skeptical, because if you really believe your story, then you're open to making it even better.
I want to interrupt you for a second on the venture capital point, because I want to ask a question that I know people in the audience are thinking, which is, what if you're the kind of person who really believes your story, but isn't good at selling it, and isn't good at seeming in the moment as if they believe it? So I'll give you an example. You know my husband. My husband is amazing at presenting stuff. So I often feel like whatever idea I have, I want him to go and just present it. And that is a talent. So is it right for these venture capitalists to be using that as their criterion? And what do you do, even more important, what do you do if you're the person in the audience thinking, I'm just not good at that?
I would buy anything that Ken sells.
Right?
Just like a month ago, we were going to make some crazy documentary where we went on a road tour of the U.S. and we were like, oh, we're definitely doing this. Right. So I don't know if we're doing that now, but he certainly gets you excited about it in the moment. He's very good at that. But no, I don't see this. I gotta say, I don't think that that being sort of quiet or reserved means that you can't communicate that you believe your story. I mean, I think that you do it in an authentic, quiet way. So, sorry, I had another thought when you were. So hold on.
Sure.
Need to pause. I lost it.
Oh, that's okay.
I was so distracted by thinking about all the things Ken sold me a few weeks ago that I lost it. But one of the questions you asked was, is it a good predictor? It turns out it actually is a good predictor. So this quality of believing your story, or I call it sometimes like grounded enthusiasm, is a good predictor of who is going to stick with a project, who is going to inspire the people who work with them on it, and who is going to be open to making it even better. So it is a good predictor, but it doesn't mean, I think we're getting back a little bit to that sort of charisma piece. And I don't think that you have to be super charismatic to show that you believe your story. Sometimes, and I'm sorry, to another more pop culture, but Shark Tank is kind of weird, right? But it's also kind of interesting. And the people who I find most compelling are not the ones who come in like super energetic. They're actually quiet, and sometimes they're nervous. I mean, you can be nervous, that's okay. But in fact, it sometimes signals that this is a serious thing and you really care about it.
Yeah.
So anyone, if you feel like you don't believe your story, then I think it's probably not the right story.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. I actually often advise people to get into the habit of speaking from a place of conviction, even like to even start small with silly things that don't matter, like how much did you like that movie? But there's something you wrote about in your book, and I read it and thought, yes, this has been my mantra forever, which is whatever your emotion is, it's going to communicate itself somehow or other.
It's leaking out.
It's going to leak out.
That's
right. So if you do have true conviction, it is going to come across one way or another.
I absolutely agree.
So I think that's some of the answer. Okay. Okay, you're going to like this one. I know.
Do I get to dance or something?
You can. How do you stay present in moments of conflict and address issues in the moment? Oh. And this question comes specifically about a work setting, but of course it applies to all of human life.
Recently people have been asking me what's my biggest challenge, because I always ask other people. Yeah. Someone turned it around on me. And it turns out my biggest challenge is not speaking. I mean, I feel really comfortable in front of lots of strangers. It's conflict with people I really care about, one-on-one. I mean, that just makes me so anxious. Mm-hmm. The stakes feel so high. The fear of losing this person that I care about or doing it wrong is, I think, terrifying. So I think that I want to say just, for a lot of people, the biggest challenges aren't even in the workplace, they're actually at home. And like the other day, I was talking to somebody who said her biggest challenge is dealing with conflict between her twin daughters, because she cares so much about it and she thinks so much about it, but then she goes in and gets thrown off and she leaves feeling really bad, like she did wrong by them. But that is her biggest challenge, is dealing with that kind of conflict. So again, first, recognize that is a big challenge. I think we think of them all as like public speaking and giving a pitch and going on an audition. Conflict is definitely one of them. To go into it knowing that you might not win. And let me give you an example of that. One of the people that I write about in the book is a Boston Baptist minister named Jeffrey Brown, who is also a great friend and now kind of a hero to me, who was one of 3 young black ministers in the early 90s who were responsible for what's known as the Boston Miracle, this dramatic reduction in gang violence. And what they did was to bring the youth into the problem-solving process. So instead of seeing them as the enemy, they saw them as the collaborators. And they did that by walking the streets many, many nights for many years, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So they met them in their territory. So first they were physically present, which was scary, but they did it anyway, and they kept doing it. And the other was to shut up and listen. Mm-hmm. And so that chapter is called Stop Preaching and Start Listening. Mm-hmm. So they went in saying, we don't have the answers, and you probably do, but you may not know what they are yet. We're just going to listen. We're going to sit here and listen. So they did. They listened, and it turned out they got a lot of answers, but they also built enormous trust. So I guess I would say that when you walk into those situations that have a lot of conflict in them, maybe the first thing to do is to be present enough to allow the other person to speak first, to ask them how they're feeling. Can they explain what, from their perspective, what's going on? To give them the floor first. You're not giving power away. You're actually allowing them to feel seen and understood.
What about that moment when they're saying something that you find to be incredibly objectionable and incorrect?
Yeah. I think you have to bite your tongue. Mm-hmm. I do. I think you have to wait.
And let them finish?
Yes, because first of all, like when you respond in that moment of anger, you're not going to respond well. Mm-hmm. And if you let them get through it, you're going to get a little bit more information about what that really is about.
Right.
And maybe then you pause and you say, I need to step away from this for a minute. But I am not good at this. This is really a challenge for me, and I'm sorry, Paul. I'm going to get better at this, but I do find that difficult, and I think letting the other person speak first, that's one way that helps enormously, because you also build trust and rapport by doing that, and you gain information, and you're not responding, too quickly.
Right. Okay. Sadly, I'm looking over, we could go for hours,
Oh
and
my
I'm looking at the
gosh.
clock and realizing we are running out of time. So I'm just going to ask you kind of one finalizing question.
Okay.
That comes from the audience, and then everybody, Amy's going to be available to sign your books and meet you personally. Okay, final question. How do you define having it all, and how do you grapple with that while also leaning in?
Oh my God, what the hell? Like, it's like everything. Okay. Wow. I recently realized, oh God, for having it all.
And you can just answer 10% of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, oi.
Yeah.
Having it all is not, some cultural prescription by, society, right? So there's no one way of having it all. I mean, so first, again, back to your core values, what is having it all for you? What really feels like what you would need to feel kind of complete, and be brutally honest with yourself. I recently had to do this. Like, I had to realize that I actually need to cut some things out of my life, because I thought that having them and doing all of these things was going to make me feel safer, and it was not. It was making me feel more scared, because I couldn't do any of them well enough. So I had to cut some of them out of my life, and that was really a scary thing to do. Yeah. So figure out what having it all really is for you. And I realized that having it all was actually having less. And that doesn't mean less professionally. It means that the professional part of my life has fewer things in it, and I get to spend more time on the things that I really love professionally. So what is it for you? Leaning in, geez, there's so much overlap, or perceived overlap, between that idea, Cheryl's work, and what I do. The lean in posture piece somehow gets kind of conflated and all mixed up. I think, and I think that her work honestly gets misunderstood often. I don't think she's saying that all women have to want to be executives. Right. I think what she's saying is, when there's something you care about, I mean, you cannot withdraw in fear. You have to be brave enough to push through the fear, lean forward, and engage with it. It doesn't mean you have to be like men, or you have to want these things. It means figure out what you want, and then don't let it slip through your fingers because you're scared.
I just came across a quote about this the other day that in some ways I think sums up so much of your work, and the quote was, "Don't let fear become a thief. It will steal so many precious things."
Oh, that's so good.
That's it. That's it.
I'm not going to let you end with the best quote.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. That is a great one.
Okay, so I just want to say, everybody, can we give Amy a fantastic round of applause?
Can we now give Susan a fantastic round of applause? I actually do want to leave you with a quote, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to one-up you. That was a great one. But it is my favorite, and from one of my favorite people who ever lived, Maya Angelou, who had almost everything figured out, it seems. But she said, stand up straight and realize who you are, that you tower over your circumstances. And to me, that kind of captures all of this. So I'll leave you with that.